There are no deaths from cannabis use. Anywhere, you can't find one.
In 10,000 years of known use of marijuana, there's never been a single death attributed to marijuana.
The total worldwide revenue of the global pharmaceutical market is currently $1.05 trillion. The total worldwide revenue of the oil and gas exploration and production industry ranges around $80 trillion. That's a lot of money and power to lose should a naturally grown plant threaten the existence of these industries. This is a cannabis plant. Marijuana is the flower bud of the plant. Hemp is the stalk of the plant. Hemp may very well be the foundation of a free society. It has over 20,000 different uses, from medicine, food, biodegradable plastic, clothing, lumber, and fuel. In fact, studies show that hemp produces more paper per yield than wood. It can also be used as building materials such as framing and lumber, as shown from these houses which are made from hemp. This implies that we have a product that can initiate a paradigm shift to how we live on this planet as a production-consumption-orientated society. If everyone could grow their own medicine and fuel, there would be no profit made for the intricate network of businesses that control our food, fuel, and medicine. This would push humanity into the direction of a resource-based economy. A true free society consisted of self-reliant human beings, educated to the highest degree, coexisting with the earth and coexisting with each other. This is exactly why cannabis has been demonized to the extent of genocide. Cannabis directly threatens the monetary-based world empires. Part 1. The Rose That Grew Through Concrete. Many who watch this channel have most likely been made aware of the story of marijuana. It is told in various documentaries such as The Union, which I highly recommend. These documentaries showcase the racial segregation tactics used in the demonization of cannabis in the early days. For those who are unaware of the story of cannabis, let me summarize. Hemp has been used for thousands of years. It wasn't until the 1930s that its demonization began. The petrochemical industry, DuPont in particular, was the force behind the Marijuana Tax Act of 1937. The Rockefeller family of Standard Oil viewed hemp-sourced ethanol as competition to their product. William Randolph Hearst, who owned most of the newspapers of the time, was threatened by the hemp crops, which would replace the need for wood pulp entirely. It was these big business special interest groups that formed the propaganda that would be seared into the public's mind for generations to come, creating the stupidity that was the reefer madness. You will notice a trend throughout the history of marijuana. The sheep-like masses believed whatever societal programming that was instilled upon them. And since 1937, each generation was told a different lie about marijuana. Cannabis would then partake in the generating of a passive culture dubbed the hippie culture, which would interfere with the warlike Nixon administration, who at the time of this report was at war with Vietnam. Despite the Shafer Commission report, which clearly states that marijuana does not cause insanity or heightened aggression, that cannabis users became more passive and peaceful when smoking. Despite that report, Nixon ignored the research and initiated the war on drugs anyway. It's no coincidence that the rise of cannabis coincided with the rise of the civil rights movement, the anti-war movement, and the cultural paradigm shift taking place at the time.
1970, beginning of the war on drugs. 76 New Jersey troopers became detectives. I was one of them. They designated 1/3 of us as undercover. I happened to fall in that 1/3. That's where I spent the next 14 years of my life. What we were targeted on was the pot smokers. There was a very good reason we were targeted on pot smokers. Most of them were protesting against the Vietnam War. Now, if you could arrest that whole group of people because they were smoking pot, you didn't have to have a Vietnam War protest, which Mr. Nixon thought was a pretty good idea.
So when President Nixon declared the Civil War that we're living in right now, the drug war, in 1972, it was really a war on marijuana.
It really didn't kick in until the 80s when Reagan, took over as presidency of the U.S.
Ronald Reagan, he said, these young people, they get together, they read books, they smoke marijuana, and they talk. Like these three elements were a recipe for disaster.
The control system set in place fear a truly educated population capable of critical thinking, which is why the ruling elite fear cannabis. It stimulates critical thinking, as this video will show. Part 2. The Great Lie.
They believe today, and I'm disappointed in the media, that it hasn't brought this information, this new information to the people of this country more than it has. They believe that marijuana could well turn out to be the most dangerous drug that is in use in our country today.
During the last century, the government lied to the public time and time again about marijuana to further the agenda of the war on drugs, or more accurately put, the war on cannabis. The first lie was that marijuana would cause insanity, and that only Mexicans and blacks would smoke marijuana, which provoked them to rape white women. This laid the foundation for a distorted perspective that lasts to this day, further instilling distorted societal conditions that serves the elitists as a divide and rule tactic. Interestingly enough, without any changes to the Marijuana Tax Act, the United States Army used their Hemp for Victory campaign to urge farmers to grow hemp to support them in World War II. Between 1942 and 1945, the United States cultivated over 400,000 acres of hemp. Very convenient. The racial stigmas from the early 1930s morphed into the stereotype that society used to demonize people who smoke marijuana. This societal conditioning allowed for a divide between baby boomers and the new generation of kids who were opposed to the control system set in place. The parents, who were already entrenched with the societal conditionings of their paradigm, viewed the actions of the youth as rebellious and irresponsible, not realizing that they themselves have been so far gone into their indoctrination that they demonize those who preach against war. John Lennon's "Give Peace a Chance" caused major problems for the Nixon administration. Should the masses catch on that they were fighting an unjust war, they would join the hippie protests, inciting a revolution. So the Nixon administration devised a plan. In order to gain public support in opposing the hippie protests, they would need to attack them from an angle that seems just. Knowing that most, if not all, the protesters were users of cannabis and psychedelics, the Nixon administration launched the war on drugs, which gave a just reason in the public's eye to arrest the protesters and ultimately shatter the movement. The propaganda machine that is the media labeled these protesters as crazy hippies that consisted of people who were using drugs. This war on drugs lumped cannabis and all psychedelics into the same category as crack, heroin, and methamphetamine. Despite the obvious differences between these substances, one major difference is that cannabis and psychedelics are not synthetically refined. In other words, they are found in nature. Quite strange to make nature illegal, isn't it? For almost a century, we've been bombarded with falsified studies showcasing the dangers in marijuana, despite the fact that there hasn't been a single death caused by marijuana.
1974, the Heath Tulin study. Ronald Reagan announces, "The most reliable scientific sources say permanent brain damage is one of the inevitable results of the use of marijuana." This study became the foundation of the government, and other special interest groups claim that marijuana kills brain cells. Here's what they didn't tell you. Instead of administering 30 joints a day for 1 year, Dr. Heath used a method of pumping 63 Colombian-strength joints through a gas mask within 5 minutes over 3 months.
They suffocated the monkeys. What they did is they put these gas masks basically on their face and they pumped pot into it, but without additional oxygen. So after X amount of time, the brain shut down. Well, if you suffocate, the first thing that's going to happen is your brain cells are going to die with lack of oxygen. So what they did is they suffocated the monkey, showed all these dead brain cells, and then went on to associate it by saying that cannabis use causes your brain cells to die. And how many people, not knowing the origin of the study, have gone on to quote it and re-quote it. And now people believe it.
Studies since have shown no signs of any brain cell damage. In 2005, new research suggested that marijuana could possibly stimulate brain cell growth. That study hasn't received the same attention. Another common belief? Marijuana causes lung cancer.
We've been hearing for years them trying to say that it causes lung cancer, and we say, really, that's interesting because you can't even show us one case of cancer being caused by cannabis use alone.
You definitely have to do it moderately because it does paralyze the cilia, but if it's not radioactive, you're probably not going to get cancer from it.
People said, well, you don't know, we haven't been smoking it long enough. Look what happened with cigarettes. We've had about 4 decades, or more than 4 decades of experience. If this was going to show up, it should have shown up by now.
Finally, a study came out just in the last month verifying that cannabis smoke does not cause cancer. It's different than nicotine. And the elements in the tobacco smoke do cause cancer, and the elements in the marijuana don't.
There's no cases of marijuana-only smokers getting brown lung syndrome. There's no cases of marijuana-only smokers getting emphysema. Strange for a plant that's so dangerous. How come none of that?
If marijuana was utilized to the full extent of its uses, what effect would it have on the human race? It turns out, when answering this question, everything becomes clear as to why the ruling elite invested so much into demonizing this plant. Part 3. Marijuana's effect on society. There are many brilliant articles and presentations demonstrating marijuana's positive effects on mental health, all of which directly contradict the claims postulated by those who cite experiments that were deliberately designed to antagonize cannabis. I have cited them in the description below. One such citation refers to the Shafer Commission report, an official study funded by the Nixon administration, which clearly showcases that marijuana is harmless. Nixon disregarded these facts and launched the war on drugs anyway, as said previously, pushing the propaganda against marijuana to the point of social indoctrination.
How do I feel about legalizing marijuana? Am I for it or against it? I am totally against legalizing marijuana.
And make no mistake, in the U.S. government, the focus of their war on drugs is cannabis. The focus of their rhetoric is cannabis.
It's certainly used as a poster child for all drugs. When you see an ad for drugs, it's always the marijuana leaf that goes up.
Why has the ruling elite invested so much money in destroying this plant and its reputation? It's quite simple. When the brain is stimulated by THC, new neurological pathways begin to form. Neurogenesis. This is why people who smoke marijuana begin to think about their societal programming from a different perspective. Marijuana in its own right is like a minor psychedelic. It subtly influences the mind, giving the user a greater sense of connection to the surrounding world. My 10 years of experience within the cannabis community has provided insight into the potential for culture mending. I've witnessed firsthand different people from different backgrounds and culture come together, smoke, and converse in peace, dissolving the artificial boundaries between people. So, marijuana is an incredible social tool for fortifying the trust between communities, which is sad considering the damage prohibition has caused. Jacques Fresco's research into human societies reveals that each perspective is shaped by the reference frame of the person. This reference frame is shaped by the environment and culture, establishing value systems, doctrines, and cultural paradigms. So, the formation of drug cartels is made possible as a consequence of the societal paradigms presented to us. Simply put, the prohibition has achieved in destroying the lives of millions, while creating the conditions to make crime possible, effectively converting cannabis from a plant that invokes peace to a plant surrounded by violence, crime, and corruption. This, over the course of a few generations, has resulted in the negative bias towards cannabis. All a carefully crafted plan to destroy cannabis, destroying the possibilities it brings us. The utilization of the cannabis plant from psychological applications to sociological applications will help shift humanity towards a resource-based economy. Part 4. Implications of cannabis. A resource-based economy states that all the Earth's resources are the common heritage of all mankind. A civilization consisted of self-sufficient educated people who are able to cultivate the means for medicine, food, and water without the reliance on corporations, governments, or any system of control. The cannabis plant provides substitutions for virtually all big business interests. Cannabis as a medicine. After almost a century of lies and misinformation, studies reveal that cannabis provides more medical benefits than any plant known to the human race. Recent studies show that the properties of the cannabis plant, when rendered into oil, inhibits the growth of cancer cells. In other words, even in its current state as a plant that we haven't even fully utilized, it shows promise to kill cancer. Years of suppression by the conglomerates of Big Pharma and the media just to maintain a flow of income to cancer research. Meanwhile, the cure to cancer has been demonized the entire time. The list of medical applications then goes on.
It appears to have benefits that we never ever knew about.
Glaucoma,
epilepsy, muscular dystrophy,
arthritis,
multiple sclerosis,
wasting syndrome,
nausea, chronic pain,
depression, anxiety, hepatitis C, cancer,
chemo,
AIDS patients.
Is there a product out there today that provides as many medical benefits as cannabis?
No. It remains an unutilized major resource.
There's no money to be made off natural plants. If you can use a natural medicine that you can grow in your own home, which costs pennies to use, you're going to do that.
Prime motivation behind any drug company is to make money, and as much money as possible.
They're corporations, and corporations, everybody knows that it's like that diffusion of responsibility thing. There's so many people working for corporations that they lose their humanity.
Hemp as plastic. The basic building block of plastics is cellulose taken from petroleum, but plastics can also be derived from plant cellulose, and since hemp is the greatest cellulose producer on the planet, it only makes sense to make biodegradable plastic from hemp and other organics, instead of continually filling the planet with plastic pollution. The possibilities here are endless with hemp plastics and resins. The technology is there to be harnessed. We just need to harness it. Hemp as lumber. Just 1 acre of hemp cellulose fiber equals to 4 acres of trees. And remember, it only takes hemp 4 months to fully mature, whereas trees take decades.
Hemp is an excellent source for biofuel.
When you grow hemp for fuel, every crop unleashes a huge amount of oxygen into the environment. And in fact, the same amount of oxygen that you lose when you burn it off, you gain back. So it's a closed cycle, ending the greenhouse effect.
There are so many hundreds of strains of industrial hemp that you can grow hemp almost anywhere in the world. Not everywhere in the world, but almost everywhere in the world. So just that alone makes it a resource for fuel.
That is the solution, is to stop using fossil fuels and nuclear energy. Stop using them entirely, and using wind and wave and sun more, and these biofuels.
Through the process of transesterification, hemp biodiesel presents a carbon-neutral replacement to diesel fuel, therefore offering another alternative fuel source to offset our reliance on fossil fuels. Hemp as food. Hemp seeds are rich in 2 essential fatty acids, omega-6 and omega-3, an excellent source of protein, iron, zinc, potassium, and fiber. The list of uses and applications literally goes on and on. The more one learns about cannabis, the less sense prohibition makes. It becomes clear when looking at all the evidence that the governments of the world have been investing a huge amount of resources into deliberately lying to the public about cannabis. They lie to us all, saying that marijuana is the most dangerous drug with permanent ill effects. I now realize what they meant to say. Marijuana is a threat to all systems set in place, a threat to all obsolete paradigms, and should it be fully utilized, it will have permanent ill effects on those who wish to maintain their power, their economic power.
We're worried about things going extinct, and yet the policy on the most useful plants in the world is that they should all be eliminated and driven to extinction.
For a society consisted of people who are able to cultivate their own medicine, fuel, and food is a society not reliant on any government or corporation, setting up a new model of living for life on Earth. Part 5. Cannabis for a resource-based economy. If you've been watching my channel, you'd be familiar with the concept of the Venus Project, a resource-based economy. Simply put, a resource-based economy outlines a world without countries, governments, control systems, and a world without money. The cannabis plant, as we now know, was made illegal primarily on the basis that it threatens our take, make, and throw away economy, which functions on the principle of maximizing production and consumption, irrespective of the Earth's finite resources. What a resource-based economy ensures is that the Earth's resources will be used in the most efficient manner possible. Not a single product will be designed to break down after a few years. Everything will be designed to last, unlike our current model of existence, which wastes the Earth's precious resources for the sake of production and consumption. Cannabis will take part in the cultural shift, which will lead to a resource-based economy. The civil rights movement, as well as the anti-war movement of the 1960s and the 1970s, were the result of a paradigm shift taking place in society. The dubbed hippie movement was in truth the emergence of a neo-humanistic culture that would have manifested into the vision that is a resource-based economy, a world without money, hierarchies, religion, segregation, hatred, bigotry, violence, hatred, and war. So marijuana has played and will play a key role in dissolving the artificial boundaries that human beings have created. What we are seeing right now is the re-emergence of the awakening. It began in the 1960s and was crushed by a monopolistic, clandestine world empire. But, like the rose that grew through concrete, no matter how hard you want to suppress nature, she will always break through at some point. Life will find a way. I guess that's why marijuana was given the derogatory name, weed. It is a weed that threatens the foundations of this false society. It's symbolic in and of itself. Thank you for watching. Please check out the documentary called The Union, The Business Behind Getting High, which dives into the story of marijuana in great detail.